Welcome back, everybody. It's the lawyer you know, and today we're going to unpack the facts and react to Britney versus Spears, the new Netflix documentary that's supposed to bring us all sorts of confidential documents, things we've never heard or seen before, that's going to open up the door to fraud for Jamie Spears, open up a big case for Britney Spears to come against her dad, and this is going to show that he knew what he was doing all along, and what we're hearing now is untrue. Well, maybe not so much. So the documentary, I think, came out this week. I watched it last night. I'm not going to talk much about her actual hearing that's happening today, September 29th, because this isn't going to post until September 30th, and I'm actually doing a live tonight to discuss the hearing, answer questions, talk about what actually happens in court. But for this video, I just want to take a second and talk about this documentary, Britney versus Spears. Before we get into the documentary itself, make sure you subscribe to our page if you haven't already. We're getting close to 15K. That's what we're trying to hit this next week. So make sure you subscribe if you like this kind of content. And if you like the Britney Spears content specifically, make sure you like this video so we can keep bringing it to you as updates happen in her case, which we know is sure to happen. Also, make sure you stay to the end of the video because I'm going to save my two biggest takeaways and biggest smoking gun moments in this documentary till the end. So stick around. When we talk about all these different documentaries, all these different people making money off of this Britney Spears story, a lot of it can be a really good thing, right? Because it's spreading awareness and we're seeing what's happening and we're learning what's been happening to her over these 13 years. A lot of different videos, documentaries, things that are coming down we can learn from, and it's giving us more information. But this one to me was billed as never before seen footage, never before seen documents. We're going to hear straight from Britney and we're going to find out what's been going on all along and how Jamie Spears, her father, has taken advantage of her in the system, and we're going to see all these claims that she's going to have against him. However, if you watch the documentary, before I give you my take, let me know in the comments, did you like the documentary? Tell me one thing new that you learned from watching this documentary than any of the other videos, shows, documentaries, or articles you've read on Britney Spears and on this entire saga that's been going on for 13 years when we talk about her conservatorship and her dad having control over her life and her finances, right? So there were interviews, like we saw someone sitting in a chair with the lights set up, not who was asking the questions, but just the interviewee. We saw Sam Lufty, who was her manager that was basically the scapegoat and was allegedly crushing drugs in her food and the reason for her downfall. We heard from Adnan, which was one of her boyfriends who was a paparazzi, I believe, at one point. And, he gave his point of view and a lot of insight there. We saw an interview set up with a doctor. The doctor's name was J. Edward Spar, who was the doctor that supposedly gave her this initial diagnosis of dementia. We saw an interview with him. What's he going to say, right? But when it came down to it, in my opinion, a lot of it fell flat. I'm not sure if we really learned anything, but I do want to pick and choose some of the stuff that I learned from it and see if it's similar to what you did, and we can kind of discuss this additional information that we have. I didn't really learn anything new from Sam Lufty, her boyfriend Adnan, her ex-boyfriend at the time that a lot of these videos were shown. He was her boyfriend. They were together running from places. He dropped her off at her house when the dad said you had to because the conservatorship is official. So we heard some from him. We heard from her old assistant that's in literally every documentary you ever watched about Britney Spears. We heard from a cameraman who became really close and was her very close confidant and best friend. She gave him a letter to read to the dad that he ended up reading. He told her handlers about. They kind of squashed it, and they stopped being friends shortly after. It was just kind of weird. I don't feel like I learned anything from any of those interviews. It was everybody kind of virtue signaling that I wish I would have done more. If I could talk to her now, I'd apologize to her and tell her, man, I wish I would have done more. I wish I would have been there to help. It was everybody trying to say, sometimes when something happens to someone here, it's like, oh, I know him, I was best friends with him, I did this to them, I have a text message from him, I have an email from him. That's what it felt like throughout this documentary. And no hate to the people that produced it and directed it and made it. It was very well done. And if I didn't see all these other documentaries and read all these other articles about Britney Spears, it consolidated it all together in one spot. You could watch it, you could learn a lot, you could see what's happening throughout this process. You can learn about a conservatorship, you can learn about how it happened. So I don't want to hate on the documentary as a whole. I'm just saying, as somebody who's been following the Britney Spears story, I was hoping for a lot more new information and confidential information, because they talked a lot about, we have these sealed confidential memos and documents that nobody's ever seen. They're privileged, they're confidential, whatever it may be. Honestly, I didn't feel like there was a lot there. One of the big punchlines to the documentary was that back in 2009, Britney's own voice, Britney's own words saying, I want to end this conservatorship. What do I have to do to end it? I want to terminate. And nothing was done at that time, right? So a lot of what Jamie Spears and the conservatorship lawyers are saying is all she had to do was ask. Now that she asked, we're getting rid of the conservatorship. We're stepping off as the conservator. We're done with this. All she had to do was ask. Once she made it known, we're all good. None of us believed that, right? But publicly, it sounded like that. Now we're hearing publicly through this documentary that's not true. They knew about it or knew that she wanted out as far back as 2009. An important nugget that we learned. Something else that was reiterated, not just once with Streisand, the lawyer, but twice Britney Spears tried to choose her own lawyer, and she was found to not have capacity to make that decision. We already knew that, but I think they did a really great job of laying out just how it worked, just how sad it was, and she really wanted to do this, but the court decided against it. To me, there had to be something in the medical records and court documents for everybody to say, all the legal people involved to say, she does not have capacity to hire a lawyer. She does not have capacity to make these decisions. That changed when something changed here recently when Matthew Rosengart was chosen by Britney to represent her. And now we've seen everything's changing and going more in Britney's favor because the lawyer for Britney at the time that was appointed for her, Sam Ingham, has been getting trashed through a lot of these videos and a lot of these articles because was he doing what's best for Britney? And I have a feeling if any malpractice suits or anything come out against him, we're going to get a lot of confidential information and privileged information shown to the court saying she didn't have capacity. I was told not to even to listen to what her decisions were. I was told to listen to the conservator. That's who I was supposed to listen to. That's my boss. Technically, he's right, even though he's looking out for the best interest of the conservatee. The conservatorship is who is paying him. And the documentary made a big deal about they're the ones paying him for this, and he's made $3 million. As I've read that, and this is something interesting that I think the documentary pointed out in a great way to me that has not been pointed out in the past, even though in the back of your mind, you realize this, but they tried to make it seem like $3 million is so much money, and it is a lot of money. But if you're thinking about a lawyer that's doing this probably full time for Britney Spears and trying to take care of all of her issues and deal with all this for 13 years, that $3 million is spread over 13 years. That's a big difference than somebody just stroking a check for $3 million, which I think is how it was billed to us on the outside looking in and watching, right? But I do think throughout all these documentaries and articles, Sam Ingham is the one that looks like he was just doing nothing in the best interest of his client. And everybody's talking bad about him, and we'll see if Matthew Rosengart and Britney's lawyers and Britney herself bring claims against him in the future. I also thought it was interesting how they broke down what Jamie Spears made. It was like $16,000 a month and $2.1 million based off of, projects that he set up or revenue that she made and what his take was off of that on top of the $16,000 a month. It was also interesting that Britney's allowance was only $8,000 a month, which seems pretty crazy when you're the one making the money and you only get an allowance half of what your dad and conservator is taking from the money that you are making. So before we get to the two big takeaways that I had from this documentary, the last thing I wanted to mention is K-Fed's family law lawyer. So he's supposedly some big shot family law and custody lawyer. He obviously did a good job for K-Fed, ended up winning that case for K-Fed. He was very skeptical of this entire Free Britney movement because he said, look, a couple months ago, she wanted this conservatorship to end. She wanted to choose a new conservator to replace her dad. She spoke up, and look at how quickly things are happening. Just within a couple months, all these dominoes are falling. I find it hard to believe, this is what the lawyer said, I find it hard to believe that if she didn't really want to speak up, she didn't have the opportunity to. She's on Instagram, she's on Twitter, she goes out in the public, she goes to court, she has statements. She could make a statement at any time to change her situation or affect her situation, and she chose not to. Now, the Free Britney activists will push back with, and my wife was screaming, well, they were threatening taking away her kids, and she wasn't going to do that to risk taking away her kids, which was referenced in some of the memos and documents that we saw. But this lawyer who works in this area and knows how things work over there, and he's a lawyer to the stars, said if she wanted this to be known, she very easily could have made it known, which proof is in the pudding, in hindsight is 2020, she did do. So do you agree with that? Do you think she could have just spoke up at any time and chose not to? Or do you think the fear of losing her children and the fear of what she was kind of put into and trapped into is why she waited until now? And if that's your answer, what was different now? Why did she speak up now? She still is in fear of losing her kids. All those fears are still there, but she decided to speak up and things changed rather quickly. So that's kind of hard to wrestle with. All right, let's get to the two biggest points in this documentary and things that I felt like I took the most away from. First, that doctor, J. Edward Spar, who was listed in these confidential documents that were found in this documentary as the only doctor really listed when they talked about dementia, when they talked about Britney Spears' initial diagnosis and how she got into this conservatorship in the first place. Well, they found that guy and they got him. He's a retired geriatric psychologist, which basically means on the elderly, he deals with their psychotic issues, which a big part of that is dementia. So they sit him down and they say, were you into Britney Spears' music before you met her? And he said, I mean, I knew about it, but I didn't listen to music of that ilk, I believe is what he said. He's like, that wasn't my kind of music. And he's, whoa, hold on. You said before I met her. I am not agreeing or disagreeing, admitting or denying that I've ever met Britney Spears or treated her or anything like that. I watched this with my wife, who's a free Britney activist, as you all know, and I looked at her and I said, so what's the point of him being here? So I figured we've got to get more from him later, right? Well, we did get more when they said, did you treat Britney for dementia? And he said, I'm not saying anything about that. And they asked him a couple more questions, which he refused to answer. And he said, all of that is privileged. All of that is confidential. Just like any of my patients, I wouldn't tell you if I've met, treated, or done anything for any of my patients unless you show me a public record with my signature on it and my report that's been public. So I'm not making anything public that isn't already public. Basically, CYA, I'm not getting caught up in this. I'm not breaking privilege, which is fine and totally reasonable. As a lawyer, I respect that, and I think that's the right thing to do. But why are you coming on this documentary? Why did the producers of the documentary put him on? I think they're trying to say, look, he didn't even say she had dementia. He didn't even treat her for this. This is all a big farce. Or they're trying to say, there's got to be more there. Why wouldn't he answer these questions? I don't know. I can't figure out why he was put on this documentary because he didn't give us any new information that we didn't know before. We just were basically able to put a face to the name that was in some of her medical reports that were early on in the conservatorship. And the word dementia was used. That's basically what we know. And they showed a checkbox that a dementia diagnosis was one of the reasons for the conservatorship. It just seems like a lot. I don't like the smoke and mirrors. I don't like people pointing me in a direction without pure fact and, trying to make me, I'm not saying they did this in the documentary. This is just my feeling as I'm watching it. I'm like, I don't know. That doesn't really actually prove anything to me. And I've learned to be, I'm skeptical by nature, but I've learned to be more and more skeptical in these times, right? When you look at the media, you look at politics, you look at big tech, whatever it is, you're skeptical of everything. So when this is being pointed to me, I'm not so sure that that proved anything to me. Let me know though, because that's why I value all of your opinion out there. Let me know if you feel differently when you watch this documentary. And point number 2, that was a big learned moment for me, was when her fiance, who in these sealed or confidential or whatever, there are privileged documents that this documentary got, said, yeah, Britney doesn't want this conservatorship, but at times she has mentioned that there may be a need for it or it may be necessary, but she definitely wants Jamie out. To me, that proves there are times she actually feels like she needs this conservatorship, which goes against like the Free Britney movement in these documentaries in this Netflix series or this Netflix movie. So I'm trying to figure out what exactly that proves. Then to me, a step further, I think it was 2009, that this fiance becomes a co-conservator with Jamie Spears. And that, to me, they didn't make a big deal about it in the documentary, but to me, that's a huge pause. Again, I looked at my wife, kind of talked it through with her, saying, so if they were so against her and they weren't making her or letting her make any decisions, she says, I want to be able to start a family and have kids and get married. Well, it seems like back in 2009, she was allowed to have a fiance, allowed to get married, and not just get married, but he was a co-conservator. He was going to be making these decisions for her, which makes a lot more sense. She chose him. She chose to marry him. So she, in fact, is choosing who has some decision-making power in her life. And they kind of just glossed right over it and went on to the next thing. But I'm thinking that, to me, shows Britney does have some modicum of decision-making and control throughout her life. And in 2009, she was able to choose her partner who was going to be a decision maker. And then when they broke up, he was taken off. He was not a co-conservator anymore. It was just Jamie again. That to me was a very strange point of the documentary that I would have liked a little more explanation on. How did it happen? Did she have to fight? Did they have to go to court? Did she have to push to get her future husband to be a co-conservator with her father? Or did her dad say, well, if that's what's best for Britney and she chose this man obviously to be her future husband, he can come in with me and we can agree on decisions? Because that would be a mark in Jamie's favor. Now, there's a stack of evidence against him, and it seems fraudulent what he did, and we'll find out as we learn more throughout the court process, and I'm sure Matthew Rosengart's doing his investigation, and he's going to turn over a lot of that to the public eventually. But that, to me, if I am Jamie Spears' attorney, I'll say, look, he was willing to concede some power to somebody that Britney Spears chose, and that's proven by the fact that when she chose a future husband, he gave him some of the power. Right? And rightfully so, he didn't give him all the power, because God knows what would have happened if this fiance was the sole conservator of this $50 million net worth of production and empire, and then they break up, but he's the conservator. Now what happens? It makes sense that Jamie Spears would stay involved and would be the conservator if they broke up and the boyfriend, fiance, future husband, whatever you want to call him, is out. It makes sense to have just that smooth transition that Jamie was already there. So that was something that made me think even more about this. But I'm not sure I really learned a whole lot from this documentary. My mind wasn't really changed. There were a couple big picture moments for me that I took away from it. But I want to know from you guys in the comments, what did you take away? Do you disagree with me? Do you feel like you learned a lot? And if so, point it out in the comments, because I'd love to have a second, third, fourth, 100th look at this to tell me what I'm missing and tell me what we can learn from this documentary, because it ended, the last 5 minutes was the speech she gave when she was able to read her statement at the hearing, which we've all already heard, we've broken down, and we've talked about. This is just a few months later, basically, is what it felt like to me. Hopefully we learn a lot in the hearing that's tonight that I'm going live to break down. That will be out before this video does, so hopefully you guys are able to check that out as well. If you haven't subscribed already, make sure you subscribe to follow our channel as we follow all of these cases in the media. But for now, that's all we've got. Thanks for watching this episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you like this content, please share it with your friends. Make sure you subscribe to our page and like our videos. If you want some interaction, get in the comments and we'll be sure to get back to you. If you want to know any more information about our firm or this page, you can find out in the description or visit tragoslaw.com. We post multiple times throughout the week, so make sure you hit that bell so you can get the notification and not miss out on the next episode.